Hey guys, welcome back to the Blues Lesson Series. In this video, we're going to be talking about note selection when we're improvising. So this is just going to give you a couple methods of approach, or just things to think about when you're playing through over whatever chord progression you happen to be playing over, in whatever style. To be thinking about the chord that is sounding and the note that you're playing on top of it, and registering those sounds. Don't misinterpret this to mean that you need to know exactly what every single note is going to sound like, because when we're talking about phrasing, creating licks, there's the collection of notes is going to, and the rhythm is part of that as well. It's not just being able to hear every single tone, but this can direct your ear, your fingers, your licks to end or start on particular notes, whatever you happen to be coming up with. So first thing we'll do, I have a little track where I'm looping an A7 chord, so we're thinking just like blues in A7 chord for 4 measures, just big long strums, whole notes, D7 for 4 measures, and E7 for 4 measures. And we're just going to play through our A minor pentatonic box 1 and let some notes sustain over those chords. And I'll just use the same series of notes. I'll play, I'll just play through 1 octave of the scale. A for a whole note, C for a whole note, D for a whole note, and then E and G for 2 beats each. So we can make it through the entire scale for each chord. And just to listen to how those notes interact with each of the individual chords. Can be a tough thing to absorb. When we put it in a more musical sense, it might be easier to relate, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detailed manner in a second. So A7, that's A, C, D, and then E and G. Now this is D7, A, C, D, and then E and G, E7, so you can kind of replay that back or do it for yourself, and I think it's a good idea to play the same thing over each chord so as not to complicate the process. But you can hear some of those notes sound good over specific chords, some of the others not so much. Now we can argue it depends on how you use them, but I'll just bring this one out that stuck out to me, playing the A note over the E7 chord. Didn't really sound that great. Doesn't mean you can't use it. Putting a melodic line or a riff or a lick on top of a chord progression is, music in general is just kind of about creating dissonances and consonances, letting things get tense and then resolving them. But let's think about that a little bit more specifically. So a minor pentatonic scale is a pretty safe thing in a blues setting, and many other settings for that matter, but that's typically the way you're going to hear it talked about. An A7 chord consists of A, C sharp, E, and G. 3 of those notes, A, E, and G, are inside that A minor pentatonic scale. C sharp is not, but we do have C natural, and we definitely use that note on an A7 chord because you get that dissonance and that would be considered a blues note. Just one of those tension notes, the flatted third, the flatted seventh, and then the quote-unquote official blues note, the sharp 4 flat 5. So if you're playing over an A7 chord, you really can't pick anything out of that minor pentatonic scale that's going to sound bad. There is a D note in there, but you got that blues note. You got that blues note right above it, and you're going to be making plenty of use out of that. So A7, super safe. And now for the D7 chord. A D7 chord is made up of D, F sharp, A, and C. So for the D7 chord, out of the A minor pentatonic scale, we have the D, the A, and the C available to us. The root, the fifth, and the flatted seventh. And then for the E7 chord, made up of E, G sharp, B, and D, we really only have 2 notes out of the minor pentatonic scale. E and D are in that, from the E7 chord, are directly in the minor pentatonic scale. And then we also have G, which is the flatted third of E7. So you get 3 notes there that you can use. Now, like I said, this is just creating a little bit of a formula to think about. So when you play over it, over the chords, you can think about aiming for some of these specific notes. A7, you can move around quite a bit. D7, you have 3 notes that are going to function pretty well over the D7 chord, and same for the E7. So let's say I'm going to take kind of a 3-note series for each chord. I'll just use A, G, and E here on strings 4 and 5 for the A7 chord, D, C, A on strings 3 and 4 for the D7, and E, G, and D for the E7 chord. And I'm just going to comprise my solo completely off of that. I have no idea what's going to happen here. But I'm limiting myself to those 3 notes. And this is not playing in a 12-bar blues format. Remember, it's just 4 bars of A, 4 bars of D7, 4 bars of E7. Here comes the D7. Create some little rhythms with it, right? You don't have a lot of note choices. I'm not even allowing myself to bend that blues note or bend any note for that matter. Use double stops or anything. So you're creating a little bit of a formula, if this is where you're at with improvisation, to have notes that I could focus on. So when I start moving around the scale a little bit more, then I can think about resolving my riff to some of those notes. This is a great way to break away from just running up and down the scale. That's the pitfall that everybody runs into. Try to think musically. Try to think about phrases. Focus on what notes you're resolving to, and always know where the chord progression is. That's why 12-bar blues is such a great jumping off point for improvisation, because there's so many melodies that sit on top of it, so many songs that have been written, and there's so many different grooves that you can use. We're only talking about A7 chords. We're not talking about any altered blues form, whether it be in minor chords or throwing a flat major 6 in, which changes the sound. And then we're using a very basic rhythm here for the chords. So if you change the groove, that's going to influence the way that you approach things too. But just an encouragement here to, in the back of your mind, know exactly where that progression is, and just playing over it is going to help your ear determine that. You know, when I work with students, that's a common issue where they say, well, I can't hear where those chords are changing. There are different things that you can do for that, but simply just playing over it with some kind of formula, and always having that chord progression looping, you'll start to recognize where the beginning and the end is, and then more specifically where the chords are changing, and then from there you'll grow, certainly with your improvisation, and then with your understanding of the harmony and the way that that can get manipulated within a 12-bar blues, or if you're playing over a rock tune, whatever it may be. This is one very specific path to take to feel a little bit more comfortable about finding notes that sound good and not worrying about just moving the fingers so much, right? The flashy stuff. You can incorporate the scale in between riffs to get to a different location, but trying to focus on that component of just musicality, articulation, rhythm, and note choice, and not worrying too much about playing excessively, because it's all about communication, having a conversation, telling a story. You're not going to tell a story by just rambling full speed without any punctuation, right? So you want to have pauses in your music. You want to let notes sustain, give a little vibrato, hang on to something and give it a different character. So there's a lot of room for discovery there. But anyways, if you have any questions, let me know, guys. I hope you have fun with it. Just remember that kind of chopping a big concept into a little piece can really give you some nice perspective on things. You want to, when something feels too big to hold on to, that's probably because it is. Just give yourself a specific way to approach it, and I guarantee you'll start seeing those leaps and bounds, jumps in improvement and understanding of what you're doing. Have fun with it, guys. See you in the next video. Thanks.